All right. I wanted to change the slide very quickly because I noticed that there's probably not enough coffee in the room for my first talk, or my originally planned talk. So I pivoted last moment and went a little more generic. I probably should introduce myself. I'm Kent Russell. I come from Alabama with a laptop on my knee. My banjo I had to get rid of in the last house move. So I suffer a couple disadvantages, and I hope you'll excuse them. But as I worked through this slides, I figured out that maybe they're not disadvantages. I'll walk through them real quickly. The first is, as I mentioned, I'm from Alabama. When I came to New York, I went to the lobby bar at the Ace Hotel, sat with my friend, and a couple of young people sat beside us. It was pretty crowded. And of course, in Alabama, we say, "Where are you from?" And she was from Washington. And I said, "I'm from Alabama. Do you notice the accent?" And she said, "I'll have to be honest. I have no clue where Alabama is." So whoever saw Peter's talk yesterday, he did us a great favor. And that not only did he render Alabama and specifically show it, he actually did it in a nice way. It actually looked pretty and appealing because he showed the coast where I actually grew up. And if you looked real closely as he was making excuses for the next data shader version would render more quickly, the biggest city name that popped up was Foley, which is where I grew up. So we do have computers in Alabama. We actually had computers back when I was 8, when I started programming in Logo and BASIC. That was 1984, so it's been a while. I wish that R existed then, because it might have made my life a lot more pleasant and helped me through some of the harder times. There were not a lot of resources in Alabama in 1984 in programming. So the other one is, I have kids too, and I don't have Lego pictures because evidently my kids are younger than yours, Jenny. Mine are all nicely organized, and I get no access to those pieces. So it's a great idea, though. He did fantastic. But we play a game called I Spy. I hope everybody knows how to play it. The next disadvantage is I spy something black with a fruit not on it. Anybody have an answer? I'm on Windows. What a disadvantage. But again, maybe not a disadvantage. How many Apple open source projects do you use in your life? None. Whereas Windows has Node, they have Python, and they have a fantastic effort, not Windows, Microsoft has a fantastic in R, which I use nearly daily. So maybe not a disadvantage, but I might be the only computer that I've seen with no fruit on the back. So the other one is I graduated in accounting. Do we have any accounting majors in the audience? Not real rich with computer programming, but it is incredibly boring and tedious. So if you can get through that, surely you can program. And the last is I deal with small data. I don't remember a single topic on small data. So I wanted all you small data people out there to know that I love you and I respect you and that your work is every bit as important as all the big data people. So let's get started. I guess I'm here. I wasn't told explicitly why I'm here, so I sort of made it up. But I started working in R in 2010. It was after 6 failed attempts. And the reason why I chose R is there's some fantastic packages for finance and portfolio management. The one specifically that got me fully into R and off of Excel and VBA were QuantMod, Portfolio Analytics, and the XDS, which is sort of a souped up data frame with time as your index. In finance, we're often dealing with time. But about the same time, just coincidentally, a guy named Mike Bostock came out with something called D3JS. And I was loving Lattice, I was loving ggplot2, thanks Hadley, and trying to push it to its absolute limit. but what I like is interactivity. I like to push buttons, and this was before these were everywhere in newspapers and magazines and all over the place. I guess another disadvantage I didn't mention is my audience is often myself, so please excuse any poor design choices. I'm not a designer. They did not teach that in accounting, if you're not aware. So in 2000, I started trying to hack ways of combining D3 with data from R, generally finance data. And I realized it was sort of painful, and that basically you write a HTML file, and then you have to figure out how to get that HTML file up on the screen. And this was, when did our studio start, Hadley? 10 or 11? It was before it was really out, so it was even more painful because we didn't have the advantage of our studio. And let me see real quickly. So if nobody knows, there's a fun little trick in our studio, and that you right-click and inspect, and anybody that's used to Chrome development tools or any of the other browser development tools, it's all built on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And in fact, the experience would not be nearly as rich without those three tools that are now available. So now when that came out, we were like, well, how do we get this little, what we made in the browser? But then the viewer came out and was like, how do you get it in the viewer window? And a guy named Ramnath Nathan, who was at McGill University at the time, had a brilliant concept where he used Mustache to fill templates, which then saved the HTML and got rid of some of the nastiness of the process. So that was called R charts. Since R charts, there's a much more robust successor. If anybody is using R charts, you might want to stop. But it's funny that R charts actually now exceeds 1,000 stars on GitHub. But Ramnath has not officially deprecated it, but he's busy now at Alteryx out on the West Coast, and I don't have the time because I'm more interested in what I'm about to show. But what I realized and what was addressed through all these talks, and I didn't know these were all going to come up, is there's been lots of speakers specifically mention the power of combination, whether it's Carlo at Pirelli with diversity of talents and hiring. The guys at Red Hat, Zach and Ram, mentioned finding the unicorn, where you have the MBA paired with a data scientist or data analyst, and you come up with a much more powerful result. So in finance, if there's anybody out there, and I promise not to focus on finance, I deliberately scrapped that, but there is an interesting concept from a guy named Harry Markowitz that we all learn in one of the first classes in finance. And this paper came out in 1952, and it's the strange paradox that under the right conditions, you actually get a better optimal risk-reward point by adding a risky asset. So this is in Plotly. All the code is available on GitHub. And I pulled this up. This is what it looks like interactively. So this point down there is 100% bonds, Bank of America, corporate bonds, US. And you'll see that as we add stocks, which are actually riskier, the x-axis is risk, you come to an optimal point here. And in fact, we can improve our return from here 100% bonds to here at an equivalent risk by adding a risky asset. And there's a couple conditions that feed into this environment. But very similarly, in my world, because of those disadvantages that I mentioned and suffer, I rely on the resources and talents of people from an extremely important concepts across a couple of boundaries. So I said, this is not a finance lesson, this is economics. I promise I'll stop on the economics here. Is Paul Samuelson in his book, which is, I'm not sure what version, but it's still being produced now, and that speculation or making money occurs across three boundaries. Time means I buy something now and hold it, and later I sell it for later. So in retirement, we save money now, hope it grows to significantly more so that we can have retire and spend time with grandkids or play golf or code. Maybe when I retire, I can just code for a living. The other is across space. Space is geography. So the example would be, I buy a rug in Turkey at a lower cost. I bring it to New York with a lot more wealthy people that love Turkish rugs, and I charge a premium for it. And I make whatever money minus shipping costs and transport costs, taxes, whatever else the government decides to add on to that. And it's, a way to do it. The other one is a little more vague, and it's uncertain states of nature. So the way I explain it is in the market, when shit happens, it really happens, and it gets quite nasty. And people, no matter what money they have, are too scared to act. So you take 2008, 2009, the most recent example, that even those people that had money to deploy at significantly lower prices were too scared to actually push the button and say buy now and sell right now would be a very good time. I go by the name of Timely Portfolio. There are two reasons I should have done this up front, is that these views do not represent the name of my firm, which I will not mention. I'm a portfolio manager down in Birmingham. And none of this, even though I don't know how you could construe it this way, should be considered investment advice. So for me, combination is just like speculation, except that I'm not necessarily making a profit off of my open source work. But it does make my life much more pleasant in both work, and for some reason I find a lot of entertainment value in what I do. The other is space, and I'll divide that by three things. Geography, like I mentioned, but also across domains and fields. So me as an accountant definitely relies on a lot of the computer science people in the room and various other fields. And the last one is programming languages. So I like JavaScript and I like R, and it's extremely pleasant to be able to combine the two with HTML widgets. And the last is psychological state. And anybody that's ever contributed to an open source project, or you have your own, I think you'll understand the pain at some point, especially if you're a lonely developer on that project, of how to keep it alive. So all these things can potentially play into this power of combination. If we can exploit all three, then we have the magic scenario of that efficient frontier. That we add something that we might not immediately understand is going to make a powerful benefit to us. But if we exploit it in the right ways, we can find a much more optimum. So everybody, I think, should know Playfair. But before Playfair, there are actually some really incredible examples of some graphics. So I wanted to give these two guys some credit. You'll see I have no idea, and with my Alabama accent, it's probably going to sound even worse. But Nicholas Crucius invented isobar lines, or isobath, almost 100 years before Playfair's Atlas. Another guy named Homa Munahisa invented something called candlestick charts, and I'll show an example of those in just a second. Playfair, I'm not even going to show because I think we're all very well aware of it. My guess is the next reference is extremely obscure, so we'll talk through that quickly. J.R. Dodge, which, anybody heard of him? Okay, good. And Willard Brenton, which I think is another fairly famous figure, so I won't focus much on him. But what I realize is I incorporate these same techniques, these same ideas in finance or in my work with R and HTML widgets from 100, 200, 300, 400 years ago. So here's this example. So you look at what Playfair produced, and then you combine it or compare it to this from 100 years before. And what I realized is I couldn't find a date for this. And I was too busy making slides to really look into it. My guess is because it took an incredibly long time to produce this thing. So I'm not sure. I never saw a reference to how long it took to create isobar, isobath lines. But you look at that map, and with a little better printing technique, I think we would all be impressed if we saw it in the New York Times. The other one, and I could not find an example from the 1700s, where Homo Munehisa inherited his family fortune in Japan and spent the rest of his life trading rice futures. And he developed a technique, and I think it took him, I can't remember, but at least 20 or 30 years, into how do we combine the prices every day when the market is open, or how do we visualize that and potentially detect patterns. Again, a lot of movement in prices and finance is just state of mind. So what's always fun about candlestick charts is watching developers of visualization packages struggle with making these simple things. First of all, their first reaction is, what the hell's a candlestick chart and why should I have to produce it? And then the more fun thing is watching them try to do the code to put it together. So it's always a fun thing to see the first issue is how do I make a candlestick chart? And it seems very simple, and then a year later and I don't know, 500 responses on the GitHub issue, it still hadn't been solved. But this was produced in R with a QuantMod chart series. And that's what a candlestick looks like. And it embeds open price, high price, low price, and close price. And the color represents whether you opened higher, whether you actually closed higher or lower than the open. There are entire books of patterns about how to potentially profit with these. I still have not talked to a single person who actually does. So if you know that person, please let me know. But they are pretty, and they're actually the default chart in the markets page on Wall Street Journal now. Whereas instead of a line or the high-low close line charts, you'll see these because they're prettier, and they also provide a much more rich set of information in the same compact space. So the one obscure reference I said is Hoyle. I don't know who this guy is. Now, I guess this was his pen name, and the only reference I can find is his name in quotes, Hoyle. And he did not invent the point and figure chart. If anybody knows who invented it, please tell me, because I looked for 2-3 days, and my Google foo failed me. But he was the first to reference it in his book in 1898 called The Game in Wall Street. Very good book, just for entertainment, if you want to read it. He was the first to mention this technique, and the example that I have here was from the Magazine of Wall Street, and it was from 1916. And what happens is when you're making a chart in 1900s, you don't want to make a candlestick chart with your pen and paper and pen and graph paper. It's just no fun. Most of the traders I know at 4 o'clock would like to go to the bar and start drinking, not sit down with a ruler and pencil. So let's see. So what you do is you condense the time, and you only show what appears to be meaningful or breakpoints, so that you get a new X column, or this one doesn't have O's. Generally, the other is O's down. Only when you get a move of whatever parameter you provide. It used to be 1 point. So when you get a move of over 3 points, you then draw a continuation of your, you change from X's to O's. If you get a move of 1 point, you continue whatever string or whatever pattern you've going up. And a lot of times you'll see in here that these are years. So this is actually, I don't remember I think it was a railroad stock, but that is those are quotes, but a lot of times you can compress, especially if you choose a percentage, which is far more applicable based on prices, you can compress that. So what I failed to mention with candlestick charts or point and figure is I'd love to hear how you could apply these to your data. Candlestick charts would make a fantastic Fitbit visualization, I think. Or if you could chart your state of mind, I'm happy or sad. What did I wake up as and what did I end as? I think it would be extremely fascinating. So again, power of combination and how can we put these things together to make them work. So J.R. Dodge, I included him because it's probably the least likely of sources that I ever expected. The Department of Agriculture in the late 1800s of the United States. And he had a good quote, and since he never gets quoted and nobody knows him, I felt like I should at least devote a slide to this guy. The best interpreter of statistics to the popular mind is the graphic method of illustration. And if you have a chance, I'll put the slides up, read the entire quote, and see that if it still applies today. For me, it does. And I was incredibly delighted to find his work about 3 years ago in this book. This is one chart that I'm not sure would pass the, is this the most effective visualization technique in our library of techniques? But it's still incredibly powerful and demonstrates a concept in a way that I don't see often today. The other is this map. A nice little choropleth with very pretty patterns. And I don't know how much it costs to put color in books then, but it had to be incredibly expensive. But again, a technique that could be very powerful and used today, and I see it every day, and I apply it in my own work. So the other one, time first. The next is space. Again, geography, domains, and programming languages. So this is a small subset of the interactions that even me in Alabama has been able to achieve. I was going to draw a line to Jenny. Thanks for putting out List Viewer. But I didn't because I didn't get it approved. So I didn't want to make any presuppositions. But the first line you'll see, and it's really hard to see, this was created with the TMAP package. And because I went with the old charts, I like this little classic effect. Oh, the purple actually shows up much better up there. This first line is to Montreal, McGill University, where I was incredibly delighted to work and learn from Ramnath Vaidyanathan on the R-Charts package. Let's see, which one did I have in order? The other goes out to Seattle, Washington. And part of the reason I publish all my stuff is, well, I'm an identical twin brother, so I've had to share my entire life, so I guess I should continue now. The other is I like to see how these things can be applied outside of my very small world. You might guess that Birmingham's not exactly the hotbed of innovation and technology. But with social networks and with open source, we can easily overcome that boundary and achieve a really, really nice effect. So this one is just amazing to me. It's the parallel coordinates HTML widgets. If anybody's seen Synagmatic, I think is how you pronounce it, or Kai-Cheng's parallel coordinates D3 library, it's Canvas and SVG. It's an incredibly powerful tool. And this guy, and again, I really apologize for my accent and poor pronunciation, Noble Odishu did an entire study on how parallel coordinates could be applied to better diagnose metastatic renal cell carcinoma. Curing cancer is probably a neat little thing to do, and if my little HTML widget, there was a couple lines of code, can help that, that would be pretty impressive. So it didn't cure anything, but he does have some very fantastic research. I'll show the Likert plot. I think it's later. I'll pull it up later. The other one, same thing. Tim Treesh, I think, was applying a neat little thing that I'll show at the end if I have time, biofabric. And biofabric was a technique invented by William Longabaugh, and it's how to cure the hairball that we often see in networks. And for those that have not looked at his work, I urge you strongly to do it because it's a hard visualization to first grasp, but once you apply it, it can offer some interesting insights, especially with network data. This other one right here, and I'm going to ask him if he's okay to stand up. Alex Bressler from New York is right there in the back corner. I asked him specifically to be here because over the last 3 years, we've been chatting back and forth. He's also in finance, but he also likes sports. I like the same. So we've been working on a lot of stuff, but I never actually met him in person until this trip. Alex has not only been incredibly useful to me in exploring some of the things, he's one of the first ever to always star my stuff, which on GitHub, if you're an R developer, I will just note that it is incredibly painful to even get a single star. And a JavaScript library that even looks a little junky will get 10,000 in a day. And it's like, how does that happen? So we had trivia night the other night. So the guess is, how much star differential is there between ggplot2 and D3.js? 54,000. And my guess is ggplot2 is probably used by more people in more domains across the US. It's older, has a stronger legacy, and it's got 2,000 stars. I mean, that's just pitiful. So if you're an R user, please go out and star. It's just painful. So here's another thing, genetics and finance. There's a guy called Broman who's in genetics research and has been a long-time R user and a very powerful pioneer of reproducible research. Here's his technique for quantitative trait loci. Again, something I was not taught in accounting, and it's applied to PIMCO mutual fund data. There's the Likert plot and the satisfaction of parallel coordinates and metastatic cell carcinoma. For those who can't tell through my awesome Inkscape skills and my incredible attention to detail, this is not real. But I feel like it is because I use them every day, and I feel like I'm best buddies with these guys. And they're on my team. Who wouldn't want these guys on your team? So I choose Hadley for data whenever I need that, and I choose Mike for visualization. Sometimes I choose just Hadley, but in general, I do that. So I have a bit of a problem. Anybody spot it? Does anybody else know somebody that has 10,000 starred projects on GitHub? And I'm not a bot, but I found something interesting about that many projects, and I try to include them in all my things. So this was a little chart. Again, you can tell my incredible sense of design. I will note, if you can't read the bottom left, if you're a hipster, please reverse the scale. But in R, we get all of these languages. I did not include C++, but all of these, and we can combine all four into a really powerful combination. State of mind is the last one, and I'm running up against my time, so I'm not going to have examples, but I'll be here all day, so if anybody wants to see HTML widgets live, and thanks to our studio for all of your work on HTML widgets. Joe Ching has been incredibly helpful, and he has basically pushed it to an entirely new level, far beyond what we were able to accomplish with our charts. What I realized in all these 10,000 starred projects, and last year when I built a widget a week and put each one on GitHub, is that most open source is extremely fragile, vulnerable, and reliant on the psychological state of a single developer. That means that these things die all the time. I mean, of those 10,000, it'd be really interesting for me to see how many have died, especially died within 6 months. And one of the things that this power of combination can do is, if I'm a JavaScript developer on my own that's made something interesting with D3, nobody stars it, nobody tweets it, I don't get on Hacker News, I have a job, I have kids, I have a life, you probably abandon it pretty quickly, except for a couple reasons. One is if people express interest. Again, Alex Bressler's been, some of these low points are like, why the hell am I doing this? It's nice to have people say, just push you along, either file an issue, give you a pull request, do something to let these people know you care. The other is you get a whole nother round of tests. I mean, if you're able to throw out our data at these things, it's a lot easier to get 8,000 data sets and throw them as good tests for these visualization techniques. This was a post I put up that I realized this is how I categorize open source. The only one that tend to last are the first ones. And you'll see on GitHub that the Explore page is almost entirely made up of these first now. Microsoft, Facebook, big companies that are paying people full-time to push these forward. I'll skip through that. And quick examples, just to give Plotly a little credit, is Carson Sievert has done an incredible job with Plotly and the HTML widget behind it. Oh, where'd it go? Darn it. There it is. So there's new animation and interaction in Plotly, and I believe the RAPI is the first to actually include these. And here's that frontier. I did what you shouldn't do in finance. I specifically chose the best period to show you, but as I said, conditions change in the rolling 5-year using, I guess, 5 or 6 packages, including PER and dplyr, produced this chart with Plotly. So you can see that this is now available in Plotly, and I got Carson approval. He has an entire book, again, thanks to our studio for Bookdown, devoted for how to use Plotly in HTML widgets and deploy it in the workflows that that Hadley and Jenny will show you, so that you just add it to your pipe and you have an animated, efficient frontier. So it's fantastic. I really have enjoyed being up here. It's been incredible to talk to all the people from the diverse backgrounds I've witnessed, and thanks everybody for putting up with me from Alabama. If you need a translation, please see me later and I'll try to help you through some of the terms. And one last thing, roll Tide.